Welcome to our Bible study. We are continuing looking at the Cumberland Presbyterian Confession of Faith. This is our 11th week, and this week we move into section 6, and that is titled Christian Freedom. And actually over the next couple of weeks we'll be looking at some various aspects of Christian freedom. Well, I'm here in our arena at home, and I wanted to be here for a reason, because the arena is a place that both inexperienced and experienced riders can come and have a little more controlled experience. There's particular boundaries, the boundaries of the gates and the fences, a little more safe place where they can practice, so that ultimately, hopefully, they'll be able to get out into the real world, if you will, in riding. And that is what Christian freedom is as well. It binds us up a little bit. It gives us a safe space to operate in so that we then can go into the real world. Well, hey there, Comet. So anyway, talk about a distraction. That's what we're going to talk about, Christian freedom and the boundaries it puts on us that actually are boundaries that completely free us. And let me begin with a story. In 1944, John Mackay was a Scottish soldier in World War II. And Edith Steiner was a prisoner, a captive at Auschwitz, the Nazi death camp. And John was one of the soldiers who helped liberate the camp. And a few days after the camp was liberated, the soldiers had a big dance for everybody that was in the camp and all, I guess, in the surrounding community or whatever, to come and celebrate the liberation. And hey. And John sees Edith sitting over there, and he asks a friend, go over there and ask that girl if she will dance with me. And to her tremendous credit, what Edith says is, no, I won't, unless he has the courage to come over here and ask me himself. Well, John screws up enough courage, and he goes and asks Edith to dance. And a very long story short, well, hi, Coda, it's good to see you too. Very long story short, they spent the next 71 years together. They fell in love, they got married, and back in February of this year, they celebrated their 71st wedding anniversary. Sadly, Edith died just a few weeks later, but they really lived their entire lives together after that experience. And I say that because as I read this first paragraph in the section on Christian freedom, I want you to have John and Edith in the background of your mind. What it's like to be liberated, to be set free, and then the choices that we make after we are set free. So here is what section 6.01 says. Through Jesus Christ, God frees persons from the shackles, oppression, and shame of sin and sinful forces, from the guilt and penal consequences of sin, and enables them to have free access to God. This freedom, rooted in love, not fear, enables persons to become who God intends them to be, to bear witness to their Lord, and to serve God and neighbors in the vocations of their common life. Now, there's a lot in that, and we're going to kind of break all of that down. That's the only section we're really going to do today. So John and the other allies literally freed Edith from shackles, oppression, and humiliation of the Nazis, just as Jesus frees us from the shackles, oppression, and shame of sin. And she could have just stopped it right there. Thank you so much, shake his hand, whatever, walk out of the camp. She is a free person. But instead, she saw something in that young man, and she chose to spend the rest of her life with him. Now, you may remember Paul several times compares the Christian life to being married, and the church is the bride of Christ, and Christ is the bridegroom. And when we get married, and we pledge till death do us part. But that doesn't mean that I get married and then I part that way. So, well, see you later, hope you have a good life, and now I'm married and that was my goal, and so I'll go off and have my life and you go off and have your life, and sooner or later one of us will die, and then that's the end of that story. Of course, that's not the story of marriage. The story of marriage is exactly the opposite. We're living apart usually, and we come together in marriage, and then we spend the rest of our lives together, hopefully, however long that might be. And that was John and Edith's experience. But so often I think we see the Christian life as I get married, if you will, I make a commitment to Christ, I make my profession of faith in Christ, and then it's like, well, now I'll just wait till I die and then I'll go on to eternal life. And we really forget that what Jesus offers us is life both abundant and eternal. And this section is just a wonderful example of that. it says, let me mention another maybe example for how this works in our lives. We sometimes say of someone who has an addiction that they're just going to have to hit rock bottom. And that actually isn't always true, and that can be a dangerous thing to say. But sometimes, of course, it is true. They do have to, at some level, whether it's hitting rock bottom or not, come to an awareness that the chemical or whatever it is that they are addicted to is controlling their lives, and they aren't controlling their lives. And whether that is at rock bottom or not, they have to come to that understanding. And it's hard for them, it's hard for all of us, because we are all such good at self-deception, at lying to ourselves. And so the addict will say, well, no, I can just hold my liquor in ways that other people can't. Or the addict may say, I can quit anytime I want. Or when the addict engages in bad behavior, or has an accident, or has relationships that get harmed because of their drinking or their drug abuse or whatever, they'll blame it on anything else other than the chemical, other than the addiction. And it's because they're lying to themselves. But sooner or later, hopefully sooner rather than later, they come to the realization that their lives are out of control. And you may know many will find AA or NA or the other 12-step programs that help folks who have addiction. And step number one is to simply admit that alcohol or a particular drug or whatever has a hold over your life, and that you're powerless to free yourself from it, and that it has made your life unmanageable. You have to admit that, which is also true in our Christian lives. We admit sin has a hold over me, and that sin may come in the form of a bottle, where I have given my life over, my allegiance over to alcohol or to whatever, rather than to Christ. Sin has a hold over me. I am powerless to free myself, and my life is now unmanageable. And the second step, as you may know, is to say, well, I have to seek the help of a higher power, is the way it is phrased in the 12-step program. In the church, we say, of course, I recognize, just as our confession says, through Jesus Christ, God frees persons from the shackles, oppression, and shame of sin. And so it is through Jesus, not through my effort, that I am set free. And we could almost say Edith is there in that camp, and she's unable to free herself. Now, she was not there because of her sin, of course, but she is in the camp, unable to free herself. And it takes John and the allies, a higher power, a power outside of the camp, to come in and set her free. And she recognized that. But then she had to decide, what is she going to do with this as well? And so, thinking now about both the idea of the 12, and let me mention that the last of the 12 steps says that the person says, well, now I'm going to continue to live my life according to these principles, and I'm going to make sure that I share this message with all others who might need to hear this message, and that is, of course, part of our commission as Christians as well. So let's hear 6.01 again, in light of all of that, in light of the story of John and Edith and the concentration camp and their 71 years of marriage, in light of the 12 steps that people have to go through, admitting that their life is out of control, looking to the higher power, and then agreeing, both through the help of the group and through others, to be able to share that message of hope with other people. John 6.01 says, through Jesus Christ, God frees persons from the shackles, oppression, and shame of sin and sinful forces, from the guilt and penal consequences of sin, and enables them to have free access to God. And so we do all of those things, and then we have a big choice to make. Now we're set free. What are we going to do with this freedom? Well, I've admitted that sin has a powerful hold over me, and I'm powerless to free myself. I've turned to Christ to set me free from the sin. And now I recognize that if I give my life over to Christ in the way, that Edith gave her life over to John, then I'm going to have a life I couldn't have imagined before, a better life than I ever could have imagined. I'm going to be freed up to experience peace and love and joy and those kind of things in ways that I never could when I was shackled by sin, when sin had a complete hold over me. And this next sentence then becomes so powerful, and I've read it to you now twice, but I want to read it to you a third time. This freedom, rooted in love and not fear. Actually, this is the second I've read it to you, isn't it? This freedom, rooted in love, not fear, enables persons to become who God intends them to be, to bear witness to their Lord, and to serve God and neighbors in the vocations of their common life. The freedom is rooted in love and not fear. So often the gospel, the good news, sounds like bad news. Well, you're going to hell, and you better turn or burn, and that kind of thing. Well, that's not the Cumberland Presbyterian Confession. That's not the Cumberland Presbyterian way, but rather we recognize that we are set free through love and not through fear. So why did Edith marry John? Was she afraid of him? Was she afraid that if she didn't marry him, he might respond in some horrible, violent way? No, of course not. Did she marry him because she felt obligated to him? Or maybe even because he had freed her, he was able to manipulate her. Well, now that I've set you free, you owe me. We have that old joke kind of about when if someone saves your life, you owe them. And so now out of obligation, you have to marry me. No, that's not at all the way it was. But she recognized in John, over a period of time, this is a man who is worthy of my love. And this is a man I want to love, I want to be with. And out of love and not fear, she married him. And we kind of know that's true because she stayed with him for 71 years. And it probably wouldn't have lasted that long if it was rooted in fear, if it was rooted in obligation, if it was rooted in a sense of being manipulated into doing that. Likewise, Jesus grants us our freedom. And out of love, not out of obligation, not out of a sense of, well, I have to now earn what Jesus has given me. I have a debt that I have to repay. Not out of a sense of being manipulated. Well, you saved me, so I guess I just have to. No, we want to be a part of Jesus and a part of Jesus' life. In a sense, as the church, we want to be the bride of Christ. We want to be married to Christ, not because we're afraid, not because we're trying to repay a debt or any of those other things, but because we want to. And we want to build our lives with Him. And the confession says that when we respond in love and not fear, then God enables us to become the people that God intends us to be first. And really think about that. God helps us be the people that we were always intended to be. Paul has that great list of the fruit of the Spirit. And who among us does not want our lives to be full of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control? That's what we want. That's what I want my life to be. That's who God intended my life to be. Not all of those works of the flesh that Paul lists earlier, but I want to have all of those things in my life. That's what the freedom of binding myself to Christ in the same way that we bind ourselves to another person in marriage allows us to have and to be. Secondly, it allows us to bear witness to the Lord. And I mentioned a little while ago, in AA, the last step is to carry the message to others who need to hear the message. We too want to carry the same message. And not that, look at me, I'm so much better than you now that I have found the Lord, but rather, as someone I think so wisely said, the gospel is one beggar telling another beggar where he found bread. And that's what we do when we bear witness to the Lord as well. And then third, we're told that we serve God and our neighbors in the vocations of their common life. And there's a lot to unpack in there, but it's so beautiful. So we become who we're intended to be. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. We are able to, out of all of those wonderful fruit of the Spirit, share with others. Here's how I found that fruit. I was a beggar looking for the fruit of the Spirit. Here's where I found it. We can share that with others. And then the way we do that is by serving God and neighbors in the vocations of our common life. Well, we're talking about marriage, so let's continue on that theme. John Gottman is the marriage therapist and researcher that I use for all of the marriage enrichment and the premarital counseling and some of the limited marital counseling that I do. And he talks about marriage masters, and he has a definition for marriages that are and people that are really marriage masters. And we might think that when he was studying that he would think, well, a couple that is really happy, they're happy together, that makes them a marriage master. And in a sense that is true, but what he discovered is what makes them happy is not that they just simply make each other happy and it's just the two of them in their own little world and everything is just wonderful in their own little world, but rather when they develop shared meaning is the way he puts it. And the way I sometimes put it with couples is when their marriages make a difference in the wider world in some way. And sometimes it's one partner who encourages and supports the other. In some ways, not always, but in some ways that's my marriage. I'm a pastor, but my wife supports me in so many ways and helps me to be able to do the things I need to do. And together our marriage has meaning. But also we do lots of things in ministry with our horses, and we do those together. And oftentimes she's the front one there. But if your marriage is making meaning, you're making a difference in the world, that's going to make you happy. And that's part of what our confession is saying as well. God frees us up to be able to serve God and neighbors in the common vocations of, in the vocations of our common lives, or our common life. And I can't hear that word vocation without thinking about Frederick Buechner and his definition of that. And the brief version is that vocation comes from the Latin vocare, which means to call. So our vocation is what God calls us to. And then he winds through the definition, but ultimately he says, our calling is this. Your calling is to where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need. Where this freedom that God has set you free, the things that God has set you free from that bring you gladness, that bring love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and all that into your life, where that deep gladness meets the world's great need, that is what it means, I think, to be able to serve God and neighbor in the vocations of our common lives. And then finally, let's think about that word common, and in two different ways I want us to think about that. Common means ordinary. It's not that we have to do incredibly extraordinary things, but the way that you treat the cashier at the grocery store in a very ordinary way, but the way you treat her or him with love, with compassion, as a human being and not as a grocery checking out machine, that is a common thing, but very, very powerful. And I like to say that we never encounter anybody without leaving them at least a little closer to God or a little further away from God by the way that we treated them. And then common also in that idea of our life together, common together. The next several paragraphs talk about how important the church is. And we need the church. We need the church so that we are in this arena and we can practice together on each other. We need the church to discipline us from time to time. And that may not be fun, but we need that. We need the church to encourage us. We need the church to celebrate with us, to equip us. And we need all of those things. And so that common in sense of being together. Well, that is probably enough for today. We will leave it there. But we know that we can do all of these things, not because we have the power and the strength within us, but because we do have God through Jesus Christ, through the Holy Spirit, with us now and forevermore. Go out today and have an abundant day. Amen.